Hi, I'm Chris, and today we're reviewing the ninth studio album from German extreme metal band Heaven Shall Burn, titled Of Truth and Sacrifice. And it's fitting that this album bears such a poetic title because it really is epic in every aspect, beginning with its daunting runtime of 19 tracks and 97 minutes, a runtime that basically guarantees the listener something that's either torturous or amazing. And admittedly, I did have a bit of dread in my system going into this album, as I thought that the first single that drew me to it, My Heart in the Ocean, was absolutely killer, but I wasn't confident that the band was going to be able to keep up that energy and grandeur for the length of a feature film. And while my main criticism of this album is that it runs a little long in its final leg, I also found that it's incredibly rewarding to listen to. An absolute behemoth of metal music filled to the brim with constantly evolving, unrelenting instrumentation that is constantly complimentary of itself, and absolutely vicious vocal delivery of some truly poetic and interesting lyrics. And all of this is aided immensely by the fact that the songwriting and performances on this album are absolutely top tier, consistently finding new ways to freshen the violent maelstroms of music with electronic elements, spoken word inserts, and lyrics that issue takedown after takedown of fascism, threats to the environment, and so on and so forth. Really, just any and all kinds of injustice. This album is an odyssey of rage, despair, and ultimately triumph, kicking off with the aggressive and dense pair of tracks March of Retribution and Thoughts and Prayers. These tracks let the listener know just how assaulting and frankly pissed off the band is going to sound during the heavier sections of the record. The drums are thunderous, the riffs are melodic, and the vocals are some of the best that a metalhead could ask for. Vicious, varied, and delivered as if the music has empowered the vocalist to scream in the face of all that ails him. And not to linger too long on the vocals on this record, but they really are perfect in the context of this album. They have a little bit of that retching quality that black metal vocals have, except with a higher degree of projection, and often give the listener the sense that the vocalist is screaming with blood in his mouth. There is literally a point where the vocalist hawks a loogie. These tracks also let us know that there's going to be a decent amount of melancholy on this record, utilizing a dropout that features a very somber bass and acoustic guitar to let the listener know just how lachrymose some of the sections on this album are going to make them. The next couple of tracks, Eradicate and Protector, lean hard into the band's fury, pummeling the listener with relentless riffs, a kick drum that sounds like helicopter blades chopping through the air, and dueling lead guitars that really support the sense of grandeur that this whole album carries with it. And then with the fifth track, Übermacht, the band brings in some eerie electronic elements and ambient synths that are somehow perfectly cohesive with the sound that they have so far established, despite on paper coming off as so disparate and frankly reminding me of Europop music. And as an aside, why is it that lately I've been detecting Europop influences on so many different strains of metal? I've heard it in Lorna Shore, The Amity Affliction, now Heaven Shall Burn. I mean, is it just me? But even with these added electronics, the band only continues to up the intensity of the heavier sections, complementing the pummeling riffs with a more measured drumming pattern that really makes them pop and feel crushing. Track 6 is the first single, My Heart and the Ocean, the song that brought me to this record, and it's another one of the more heavy-leaning tracks, although it is scaled back a bit in terms of intensity. And in terms of what is going on specifically with the music on this song, I'm not sure that there's much I can say that hasn't already been said. However, it does stand out as feeling as if it is the mission statement or the war anthem of the whole album. And then we get the song Expatriate, which at nearly 9 minutes manages to be one of the most rewarding sections of the album. Building upon piano, strings, and electronics, until the song starts to explode with screams and distortion and vocal inserts of spoken word monologue. And it all sounds as if the song is destabilizing and collapsing around the listener. It is such an emotional, cinematic experience, and it leads perfectly into the next track, What War Means, an absolute rager in which the band attacks you with the full rage of those victimized by war. And it's on this song that we also hear some more distinct black metal influence as the band delivers all of this anger among a blaze of blast beats and tremolo picked guitars as we get into the middle section of the song. And it's at this point in the review that I'm going to have to start painting in broader strokes when dissecting this album. Because as we approach the halfway point on this thing, the band does begin to noticeably recycle some songwriting tropes and some techniques that have been working for them previously. And don't get me wrong, the songs on the back half are good. I would even go so far as to say that the back half is just as good in terms of pure objective quality as the songs on the front half. However, it's difficult to break these songs down specifically, without retreading territory that I've already pretty thoroughly discussed so far. And I wouldn't say that the album ever becomes tedious, but it does become a bit exhausting. Because once you get past, I would say, the 50-minute mark on this album, you begin to recognize some of the things that I just stated, some of the recycling. It's not literal repetition, but there's a lack of evolution or innovation past roughly the 60-minute mark that is notable and does make me think that this album could have been about 20 minutes shorter. And you'll note that saying that it should be 20 minutes shorter does not literally cut the album in half. It would still leave it at 77 minutes. And that's because on the back half, there are a couple of standout tracks that I have to draw attention to. The first of these is La Résistance, which is a track that leans super heavily into the weird electronic territory, sounding even more like Europop than the song that I mentioned earlier, Übermacht. And, it's kind of funny because this one is actually almost better because of the exhaustion that I was feeling. It serves as a really nice break in the middle of a series of unrelenting tracks. It serves as this sort of moment of almost levity, not that the lyrics have any levity in them at all, but just sort of musical levity, a bit of a break, a respite from all of this anger and rage and distorted guitars and pummeling drums, which, as I've said before, for some reason sound like the blades of a helicopter. And altogether, since I think that it is incredibly well composed, and since I think they really stuck the landing with it, the fact that it is so strange makes it stand out to me, particularly in the mix of a number of tracks that, after about 70 minutes, begin to sound a little bit the same. And of course, attention has to be paid to the closer on this album, Weakness Leaving My Heart, which beautifully brings together all of the elements that we've heard thus far into a track that hung with me, leaving me in silence for minutes after I finished the record, progressing from cold piano and electronic choral synths into violin, and then finally exploding into rippling heavy metal instrumentation and screams of defiance from the vocalist. This track is really moving, and I mean that genuinely, which leads me to maybe the biggest compliment that I have for this record, which is this is the first time that I've sat down to do one of these reviews, and in the course of taking notes, I thought to myself, this album is inspiring. And it's not that the other albums that I reviewed haven't been artistically provocative or inspiring, but genuinely, this is the first time I've sat down to do one of these, and not a moment of the record passed by where I didn't have the impulse to go look up the guitar tab and learn how to play the songs myself. And that's a really great compliment for any album, to have your audience want to engage with the music on that level. So altogether, this album is truly great. It's too long, so long that I can't even talk specifically about it without drawing this review out to half an hour and having 20 minutes of that be me repeating myself. But everything that's delivered is incredibly high quality and much more emotionally moving than your standard metal fare. So, on a 1 to 10 scale, I'm going to give this album a very strong, almost reaching upward 8 out of 10. And with that, see ya.